everyone! Today we are diving into a genuinely terrifying sequence of events known simply as the last passenger. We're going to map out exactly how a totally normal night shift spirals into just absolute psychological horror. So grab a seat, get comfortable, and let's unravel this mystery together.
Okay, let's dive right into this. Imagine a cold, rainy night in the city of Pune. Our protagonist is a cab driver named Rohan. He's completely exhausted, just finishing up this really grueling shift, and the streets are dead quiet. But then, at exactly 1:30 a.m., his phone lights up. A new ride request. But here's the weird part. The pickup location isn't a house, it's not an office, it's out on the old Mumbai-Pune highway, specifically near an abandoned bus stop. Rohan actually hesitates. He's thinking, who on earth requests a ride from an empty bus stop at 1:30 in the morning? But the app shows an unusually high fare, so against his better judgment, he accepts. Let's move along the timeline and see how this builds. He accepts the ride at 1:30 a.m. Rohan pulls up to the location at about 1:40, and the environment is just screaming warning signs. The stop is completely deserted. No other cars, no people, absolutely nothing. He's literally seconds away from just canceling the whole trip and going home. But then, at 1:45 a.m., a figure emerges from the heavy rain. It's a woman, just standing under a nearby tree. She's wearing a white sari, and she's got this long, dark hair that obscures almost her entire face. She walks super slowly over to the cab, doesn't say a single word, and just climbs right into the back seat. Naturally, Rohan asks her where she wants to go. Her only response is this icy, "Just drive." When he pushes for a destination again, she just casually says, "I'll tell you." And what follows is 10 agonizingly long minutes of pure, uninterrupted silence. Just imagine the claustrophobia inside that cab. The only sound is the heavy rain hammering against the windshield. It's really a masterclass in building tension. You've got this tiny enclosed space, a driver who is already super on edge, and a passenger who flat out refuses to communicate or even show her face. Then, completely out of nowhere, that heavy silence is shattered. The woman in the back seat suddenly asks, "Do you believe in ghosts?" Now, Rohan does what pretty much any of us would probably do in this incredibly uncomfortable situation. He lets out a nervous little laugh. He tries to brush it off logically, casually replying, "No, not really." He's desperately trying to keep the interaction grounded in reality, basically attempting to laugh off what feels like a really strange, maybe slightly creepy prank. So the crucial point here is her reaction, because she gives him absolutely zero comfort. She just whispers, "You should." And immediately there's this intense physical shift in the environment. The temperature inside the car just plunges. A literal chill runs right down Rohan's spine. Desperate to kind of change the subject and reassure himself that everything is normal, he glances up into his rearview mirror, and his heart nearly stops. The back seat is entirely empty. The woman has completely vanished. Absolute panic sets in. Rohan just slams on the brakes. The car skids dangerously on the slick, wet asphalt before screeching to a dead halt. He violently spins around in his seat to check the back. I mean, the door's never opened, right? But the seat is empty. There's absolutely no one there. His breathing goes into overdrive, and just as he's trying to process this totally impossible reality, he hears a voice. And it's not coming from the back seat. It's directly next to his ear, whispering, "I'm still here." And this brilliantly illustrates the true horror of the situation. Rohan screams, right? He looks back into the mirror and suddenly, boom, she is sitting right where she was before, totally motionless. She slowly raises her head, and for the very first time, Rohan actually sees her face. The details are horrifying. Her skin is totally pale, her neck is twisted at this impossible broken angle, and her eyes are completely black. No whites, no pupils, just endless dark voids that are suddenly illuminated by a flash of lightning. The woman then commands him to stop near a dense patch of forest and begins this incredibly grim confession. First, she points out to the dark trees and just states, "I died there." Second, she establishes the timeline, telling him it happened 3 years ago. And finally, she explains exactly how. She was in a taxi, returning home. The driver was drunk. He crashed. And as another bolt of lightning flashes, she reveals the absolute darkest part of this story. She says, the driver crashed and survived, but she didn't. And as she tells Rohan this, her unnatural, twisted smile just widens.
Now, what's really terrifying about this moment is how the physical world itself starts violently shutting down around him, effectively trapping our protagonist. The woman leans in super close with those solid black eyes and asks if Rowan wants to know what happened to that driver. When Rowan frantically says no, she lets out this terrible, unnatural laugh and says the driver disappeared. Right then, a massive thunderclap literally shakes the car. And notice the progression here. First, the engine dies, then the headlights completely switch off, and finally, his phone loses all network and GPS signals. Rowan is instantly submerged in absolute suffocating darkness. And then, sitting there in that suffocating pitch black, a sound. Scratch. Scratch. It's coming from outside the dead vehicle. Something is slowly dragging itself around the car. Rohan is absolutely paralyzed at this point, peering desperately through the rain-streaked windows out into the pitch-black forest, just praying to find the source of the noise. Scratch. Suddenly, a violent flash of lightning rips entirely across the sky, lighting up the trees. And the forest is not empty. Dozens of figures are standing out there among the trees. Men, women, and children. All of them are wearing soaking wet white clothes. And they aren't moving. They aren't blinking. They are just standing there in the rain, silently watching the car. The woman in the back whispers that they were passengers too. Passengers who lost their lives on this very road. The figures slowly begin walking toward the cab, entirely surrounding it. They press their pale, dead faces right up against the glass. The sheer variety of this mob is gruesome. There's a man with no eyes, a figure with a completely crushed skull, a child with a broken jaw hanging loosely from his face. Rohan slams the locks down, shuts his eyes as tight as he can, and starts actually pleading aloud for it not to be real. But the woman just laughs from the back seat and tells him, oh, it's real. When Rohan finally works up the courage to open his eyes, the mob has completely vanished. The windows are empty again, the road is totally silent. He lets out this massive, shuddering sigh of relief. The nightmare seems to have paused. But man, it is a false relief. He checks the rearview mirror and the woman is gone again. But the back seat isn't empty. Sitting directly behind him is a man's face, but the face is actively rotting, skin literally hanging off in long strips, with these blank, dead white eyes, and the creature is just smiling right at him. And that is the ultimate breaking point. Rohan screams, throws open the car door, and just bolts. He plunges blindly right into the dark, muddy forest. He doesn't care about the torrential rain, he doesn't care that he can't see a thing. He is in a pure adrenaline-fueled sprint, tearing his face on low-hanging branches, his feet just sinking deep into the thick mud. It is a frantic, totally desperate attempt to somehow outrun an impossible nightmare. Just as his strength is really starting to fail him, he sees it. Salvation. A single, warm light cutting through the rain up ahead. It's a small, little roadside tea stall. There's an old man standing inside. Rohan rushes in, completely hysterical, practically begging for help. He unloads the entire insane story on this poor guy. The mysterious woman, the broken neck, the dead passengers surrounding his car, the rotting man, literally all of it. The old man just stands there and listens to all of this. Slowly, his face just kind of hardens. After what feels like a really long, incredibly heavy silence, he asks Rohan if he picked up the woman. Rohan nods frantically. The old man just sighs heavily and says, "Many drivers have seen her." When Rohan begs to know what she is, the old man doesn't even look at him. He just stares out at the dark highway. And instead of answering directly, the old man slowly raises his hand and points toward this heavily weathered newspaper clipping hanging up on the back wall of the stall. Rohan slowly walks closer to read this 3-year-old article. And right here is where we hit the massive, chilling twist of our explainer today. You have Rohan's perceived reality. He firmly believes he is alive, fighting for his life, trying to survive a terrifying night shift. But then you have the newspaper's reality, which tells a starkly, horribly different story. The headline screams, "Drunk taxi driver killed in highway crash." And right beneath that headline is a photograph. It's Rohan. His own face is staring right back at him. His name is printed directly underneath. He died 3 years ago, in that exact same accident, on the exact same road, with the very female passenger he thought he just picked up tonight. Rohan stumbles backward. It's just a total psychological collapse. And as the horrifying realization finally hits him, the entire illusion shatters. The tea stall literally evaporates. The old man vanishes into thin air. The warm lights fade right back into the cold downpour. Rohan is suddenly standing completely alone on the empty, rainy highway again. But then, a familiar voice speaks from directly behind him. "You finally remembered." He turns around and there she is, the woman, smiling that twisted smile, her black eyes fixed right on him. Tears are just streaming down his face now. The denial is completely gone. The horrifying truth of his own demise has finally broken through his fractured memory. Stripped of his reality, basically just a dead man standing on a deserted road, he looks at the ghostly woman and asks the ultimate, tragic question about his new existence. He asks, "What am I?" The woman's reply is actually gentle, yet it delivers the most chilling, final verdict imaginable. She simply looks at him and says, "A passenger." And the very moment those words leave her lips, the highway simply ceases to exist. The rain completely stops, the entire physical world vanishes, leaving nothing behind but pure, suffocating darkness. The narrative concludes with this image of pure existential dread, because as the darkness consumes everything, absolutely everything, the very last thing Rohan sees is an endless line of ghostly vehicles stretching infinitely into a black void. It is a literal purgatory, and inside every single one of those vehicles sits a passenger, exactly like him, doomed to wait for a ride that will never, ever end. Which brings us to a final, haunting question to leave you with today. What if the nightmare you're desperately trying to escape is actually a memory you can't outrun? Rohan wasn't fleeing a monster in the woods, he was fleeing his own guilt, completely trapped in a continuous, eternal loop of punishment. It perfectly illustrates the terrifying concept of an inescapable fate. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive into The Last Passenger. It's a dark one for sure, but the narrative structure is just absolutely fascinating. Keep questioning what you see, and I'll catch you in our next explainer.